tillbaks från kaffet. Hoppas ni har minglat bra med massa nya spännande människor. 600 pers i det här, eller kanske fler, 650 någonting uppåt det, så det känns superkul. Och väldigt roligt att ha nästa talare här såklart, and we'll switch this to English. I'm very happy to have one of the most interesting and maybe thought-provoking speakers on where the internet is and where it's going. And I think we should just give a warm hand to our next speaker, Jarvis. Welcome up on stage. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you. And welcome to Sweden and welcome to Göteborg.
Göteborg.
Göteborg, right?
Göteborg.
Göteborg. That's pretty good.
One language lesson for the American. On the count of three, say that name for me. 1, 2, 3.
Göteborg.
A lot better than Gothenburg.
So you're going to speak to us on where the threats for the internet and maybe some opportunities that we will see in the future. Welcome here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I love Sweden dearly. I love listening to your language. I didn't understand a damn thing said this morning, but I still enjoyed sitting here just listening to such a wonderful language. So Magnus asked me to talk about the dangers to the internet right now, so I'll do that. I'm going to come off as the pessimistic American for a little while. And I think that there are three forces at work trying to affect the future of the internet. One is control, two is protection from legacy institutions, companies, and governments, and then three is what I'll call techno-panic. And so I want to go through those three areas, some of the history of it, some examples from the past, and then what to do about that. So control. This is fairly obvious. This is a fairly easy one. We see companies and governments trying to control the net. Companies in the fight over net neutrality that are trying to fight that down. Telephone companies that want to control the net because they think they own it, because they put the pipes into our homes, and they want to control what we can see. And we have to fight about that. Government is trying to control the net, clearly. There are censors in Iran and China and even Turkey trying to control what we see. There are governments like China that are trying to make sure they have our identity so they can control what we do there. And of course, there is the NSA, and as an American, I apologize to you all for what it's doing. It's trying to control all the information about us. That's a fairly obvious issue for the future of the internet. The next one that I think matters a great deal is one of protection. What we see is large companies that are threatened by the net trying to protect themselves in various ways. And we particularly see this in Europe, and particularly in Europe in Germany, where we've seen a great deal of fighting against especially Google. Google is a symbol of the net and a symbol of what's going on. But it's not just Google. In Germany, we saw the banning of Uber, the car service, until a court overturned that only, I think, about a week and a half ago. I like what Neelie Kroes, the EC vice president, outgoing EC vice president, said about Uber. She said, the fact is that digital technology is changing many aspects of our lives. We cannot address these challenges, she said, by ignoring them, by going on strike, or by trying to ban these innovations out of existence. We have to deal with these innovations and figure out where the advantages are. And yes, there are issues about Uber, about safety, for example, and insurance, for example, but that can be dealt with legislatively. But Uber provides many new opportunities for consumers, many new opportunities for small entrepreneurs. It's just the way the world is meant to work, that people can connect and transact with each other. At the same time, we see Matthias Döpfner, the head of Axel Springer, the conservative German publisher, going on the war path against Google. He published open letters comparing Google to the mafia and Big Brother. He compared Facebook to the Stasi, for God's sakes. He said that Google is trying to build an island without any laws. Come on. He said, we're scared of Google. And I wrote back saying that I was amazed that such a powerful man as Dr. Döpfner could be scared of Google. German publishers took out ads recently fighting Google and trying to get the EU to back down on the antitrust settlement with Google, and the EU did back down to that pressure. We also see that News Corp joined in. Now there's irony here. Axel Springer and News Corp are two conservative bastions that don't believe in government and big government and don't particularly like the EU. But when they failed at their own business models, what did they do? They went running to government to try to get protection against their competitors. I would say unfair protection. We see Spain. Spain is also looking to tax the link, which I find to be a frightening possibility. And this is an effort, once again, to protect legacy institutions and publishers. Now, we have to understand where this fear comes from, because what we see happening is nothing less than the end of mass media, nothing less than the end of mass manufacturing, nothing less than the end of the idea of the mass. You're not a mass, I'm not a mass. We were portrayed as a mass by media these many years, and now on the internet we can again become individuals. Gigantic, huge Google knows me as an individual. This might frighten some of you about privacy. Google knows where I live and where I work, and I'm fine with that because it gives me traffic every day between where I live and where I work. My local newspaper doesn't know where I live and where I work. It can't serve me personally. That's ridiculous. So we see the end of the mass. We also see the idea that technology leads to efficiency over growth, and that frightens these institutions. So we see control and protection. The other force that's affecting the internet is what I call techno-panic. It's a cultural fear of change and a wish to forestall that change, which we see going on. A few examples of this, and I constantly go back to Germany because that's where it happens. We have the fight against Street View. We had government officials in Germany convincing 250,000 citizens to demand that Google blur their buildings on Street View, leading my German friends on Twitter to dub their nation Blurmany. And we also saw, as is the German want, the creation of a new word, a Verpixelungsrecht, a right to be pixelated. What happened? Well, Google finally said, oh, to screw you, it's not worth the trouble, and they took Street View, any new Street View efforts out of Germany. We see a German official saying that the combination of facial recognition and geotechnology was taboo forever. Well, I understand why you might say that, but imagine how those technologies, facial recognition and location, could be used to find missing children or missing Alzheimer's patients or people after a flood or a disaster. Don't regulate the technology because of what could happen that's bad, because you'll miss what could happen that's good. We see a company called Cyborg Unplug out of Berlin again, which will, if you plug it into your Wi-Fi, will turn off anybody's glass or other or drone cameras. Now, a friend of mine who was with the New York Times, Nick Bilton, worried when he saw people at Google I/O come into the men's room with Google Glass on. And I said, Nick, nobody wants a picture of your junk. If you think everybody wants a picture of your junk, maybe you have the problem. And indeed, if you think that just one little new technology can turn everyone you know into an asshole, you have a problem. We're not that vulnerable to new technologies making us suddenly act bad. And then we have the Europeans' court's right to be forgotten, which I consider an absolutely abhorrent decision. Again, I understand politically why it sounds good, but it forgets the right to remember. And in Europe, of all places, you would think that there would be a knowledge of the danger of trying to rewrite history, the danger of trying to control knowledge, the danger of telling people what they're not allowed to know. That's dangerous. These are things that I call techno-panic, but they're hardly new in life. When the book was invented by Gutenberg, there were those who feared it. One writer in England said that printing filled the kingdom with so many books and the brains of the people with so many contrary opinions that these paper pellets become as dangerous as bullets. Books were dangerous, my friends. When the Kodak camera was invented, at the time, the New York Times had great stories about fiendish Kodakers lying in wait to assault the good ladies of Newport. The camera was a dangerous invention. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything to you. And this caused the first serious discussion of a legal right to privacy in the United States, which was very important, but it came out of a fear of the camera. I find it fascinating to look at the case study of the telegraph. I've been looking up some old clips about that recently. And in 1865, the New York Times printed a letter that argued that Telegraphing is not such a business as women should seek to engage in. It brings them in contact with too many rough corners of the world. In 1880, a woman wrote a novel, a love story based on the telegraph called Wired Love, a romance of dots and dashes. Imagine how different it was to have this idea that you could talk to someone you couldn't see, who was strange, at a distance at the same time. That was brand new, and we didn't know how to deal with that. 4 years later, the New York Times printed a story, and pardon me for reading these, but I think these quotes are kind of lovely. And they reported that, quote, "Whatever may be its advantages, marriage by telegraph is not always safe. The truth of this has just been learned by sad experience by a widow lady who married a telegraph man whom she believed to be a leading citizen of his particular town. Sometime after the wedding, the bride met her husband and was greatly disappointed to find out he was a mulatto barber with a firm determination to abandon shaving and professional conversation and to live exclusively on his wife's money." Now note the racial undertone of that, the fear that you were talking to someone you couldn't see. Who might that be? Technopanic. In 1852, Telegraph magazine, yes, the predecessor to the internet world, was called Telegraph magazine, reported there were congressmen in the US who wanted to pass a law to regulate, quote, "the transmission of intelligence by telegraph, to prevent the telegraph from daily deluging the country with willful and mischievous falsehoods." Does that sound familiar? Oh my God, this new technology is going to bury us in mistakes and falsehoods and lies. In 1858, a correspondent at the New York Times complained, and again, I'll read this quote because I love it. "There can be no rational doubt that the telegraph has caused vast injury. Superficial, sudden, unsifted, too fast for the truth must be all telegraphic intelligence. Does it not render the popular mind too fast for the truth? 10 days brings us the mails from Europe. What need is there of scraps of news in 10 minutes or in 10 milliseconds? Now, just as there is irrational fear of technology, so is there irrational exuberance. Too much faith put in the technology, too much joy about it. When the first telegraph message passed under the Atlantic in New York City, people took the day off, says the newspapers. There were fireworks, there were parades. Oh my God, life was going to change. Queen Victoria's first message across to the US, actually the line wasn't so good, it actually broke a few days later. It took 18 hours to get her message across on the telegraph. And President Buchanan sent back his message then to the Queen. And he declared, "May the Atlantic Telegraph, under the blessing of heaven, prove to be a bond of perpetual peace and friendship between the kindred nations." We were going to have world peace. Of course, soon we didn't. We had World War. He also asked, and I find this very interesting, in his declaration, President Buchanan asked for, quote, "a declaration that it shall be forever neutral and that its communications shall be held sacred in passing to their places of destination, even in the midst of hostilities." Note there was the first call for net neutrality around the telegraph. One more example. A letter to the New York Times in 1858 from someone who didn't like the telegraph, and beyond that also wasn't too crazy about electricity. He complained that electricity had not changed man's morals, saying, and I quote, "Where is the evidence that the discovery has changed a particle of his moral nature? The country at large has not advanced in morals or Christianity. Neither the government nor the people are a whit more patriotic, nor does common honesty more obtain amongst men in their dealings with one another, nor are they better prepared to render an account of their actions at the judgment seat of God." Electricity was supposed to do all that? You know, who said? But that's part of the problem, is that we imbue technology with both our greatest fears and our greatest hopes. And both are wrong. But what we should do with new technologies is see the opportunities. But we can't see the opportunities if we are stopped because of the fears. And that's what's going on with technopanic. So what's really happening here? We are negotiating our norms as a society as technologies change our circumstances. right? When the camera came out, people freaked until we figured out the rules of being able to understand when you should and shouldn't take pictures. And now, of course, we all take selfies all day, and you've seen them on the screen. We love cameras. We love having our picture taken because we figured out the norms. When cameras were added to our phones and people could carry those, people did indeed say, oh my God, people are going to go into the locker rooms or in Germany, the saunas of the world and take pictures. It's the problem with my friend of the New York Times. It's not going to suddenly make us uncivilized. We know what our rules are. We establish our rules. We're smart, we people. We'll figure it out. But when the new technology comes in, our old rules, our old norms, and in some cases our old laws aren't caught up to this. So the impact of technologies is, God knows, important, but it's often over-amplified. And I think that is what is happening to a great extent with these new technologies. Technology, I don't think, has really run amok in history. Yes, we have pollution. Yes, we can be killed by cars. Yes, technology can have its problems, but we don't choose to stop those technologies because something bad could happen. And that's what we see happening right now. In the end, what we should be talking about is not the technology, but the human behavior around this. We should be figuring out where that goes. And the truth is we already have the laws and the norms to govern much of that. A quick example. In the United States, and this is very relevant to the NSA story, we have a constitutional right to privacy in our first-class mail and packages, period. That means that law, that right, was written to a technology, the Postal Service, and we say this in a great postal edifice here. Well, of course, along come new technologies, email and direct messages and so on, and there is no protection for us there, and that's how the NSA could trample on our rights. Well, what was wrong in that case? The right should have been written not to the technology, mail, it should have been written to the principle, and the principle is that private communications are private unless certain circumstances occur, and for example, that there's a lawful warrant to find out something if law is being broken. But that's not what we have. We have law written to technology. That's very dangerous. In the end, we have to worry about our own human behavior, but we also have to trust our fellow man and woman. Technology is not going to suddenly make us uncivilized louts and assholes. Technology, in fact, can help us do things better. And if we allow people to have that opportunity, great things can happen. But in the meantime, damage can be done. We can get bad laws passed. We can get bad laws passed, for example, I would say the right to be forgotten, that are of the moment and of the current fear and don't think through the full implications. And so now you see tens of thousands of requests going into Google to take down things of all sorts. And of course, what happens now is newspapers are realizing the impact that has on their free speech, so they're publishing every instance of a takedown notice that comes, which only brings more attention to that which was taken down. It just doesn't work. You can't control knowledge that way. You can't pass a simple law that cynically is going to reassure everybody that we're not going to change. We are going to change. What should change in this? I think what has to change is that we as a society have to become more tolerant of the idea that we were all young once and we all screwed up once or twice. And that we have to become tolerant of others and not think that that's going to end your life if you don't have control over that information. So bad laws can be passed. I also think that a result can be that some places can lose investment and innovation. And I see that as an opportunity for Sweden within Europe, because frankly, my friends in Germany are going retrograde. And I think that frankly, right now, if I were looking to start an internet company, though there's a huge and great startup scene in Berlin, I would be very fearful of the regulatory and legal atmosphere there and the cultural atmosphere there. There's a much more open attitude, as I take it, here in Sweden, and I think that's an opportunity to take business away from elsewhere. But even so, the atmosphere in Europe is causing some concern, I think, for investment. So I worry what could happen here, what to do about that. Well, I would argue that you, of all people, you who are the leaders in innovation and advancement here in Sweden should take the lead and fight the protectionists and remind them of the need and opportunity to find the opportunities that the internet brings. It's up to you to do that. If we sit back and just try to take the scars that come from the complainers, then they'll win the discussion and they'll win the day. Next, don't regulate the technology, regulate the human behavior, and recognize wherever we already have laws that do that. Enforce those laws where they exist. But at the same time, it's important that we understand the technopanic, the fear that change causes, and recognize that and appreciate that and try to respond to that. The best way to respond to that is with best practices in technology, that we should be as transparent as possible. I didn't bring today my Google Glass because frankly it's pretty useless for $2,000. But what, and I do, however, have my new Moto 360 watch. Are you jealous? It's really pretty cool. A little dorky, right? The design a little much, but it really works. It takes over 2/3 of the function of Google Glass. It gives me instructions and updates here. And Google Glass is still interesting because it has the camera that lets you record and share anything you see at any time. Now, that freaked people out, right? And I don't blame them because there wasn't transparency about it. If I were redesigning Google Glass today, I would put a red light on it. And whenever the camera goes off or the video is on, the red light is on. Transparency. We need to have best practices about privacy and transparency with technology so we anticipate the fears and give people a sense of empowerment rather than a sense of losing control. It's not that hard. So empower users, make them feel powerful. And finally, I think, I would love to see Webbdagarna turn into a World's Fair of the net. Why don't we brag about the technology? Why don't we boast about it? As I've been doing some reading on history and looking back at World's Fairs from the past, it's really quite wonderful to see how people celebrated new technologies, how the wonder of steam engines and what they could do, and pavilion after pavilion after pavilion of electric lights and steam engines and all these technologies that were going to change life and add to life. And yeah, sometimes they were wrong, and no, it didn't bring world peace, and no, we're not all driving jet cars. The predictions can often be wrong, sure. But let's celebrate what technology brings us. I don't think we have enough of that. And if anyone is going to do it, it's you. It's your responsibility to protect the opportunities that technology brings us. So I want to just mention one more thing, which is the timeline that we're in here. And I think that we're very, very early in on these inventions. I've become a bit of a fanatic about Gutenberg. Sounds like Gothenburg. And the lessons that we get from the press, because I think that Sir Tim Berners-Lee is the Gutenberg of our age. I think that in inventing the link and with it the web, he has invented a fundamental technology that changes, that pretends to change society as much as the press did. I won't live long enough to know that, but I think that's what's happening. And if we look back at Gutenberg's age, which is really from his day until now, and what it caused, I think there are some lessons. It took 50 years after the invention of the printing press before the book, I know, I'll be done soon, before the book took on its own form. When the book was invented, it mimicked, the fonts that Gutenberg created mimicked the scribe's handwriting. Printing was called automated writing. We always see the future in the analog of the past, right? In English, cars were horseless carriages, refrigerators were ice boxes. The fact that we still call this a telephone is ridiculous because I hardly ever talk on it. But we always have to use what we know to see the future. And printing, again, was automated writing. After 50 years, the book took on its own form, the title page and the index and what we now know as a book. Elizabeth Eisenstein, who's the key scholar of Gutenberg, says that it took 100 years for the impact of the book on society to be fully recognized. Now here's my favorite stat. It took 150 years after Gutenberg's invention before anyone thought to create a newspaper. Now, a newspaper seems to be such a self-evident, natural invention. Oh, I have a printing press. I'm going to share what's happening today with people. But 150 years before anyone thought to do that. Well, I think that we are that far from what the internet's going to be. We don't know what the internet is yet. We don't have the faintest idea what it is yet. Indeed, what we're still doing is transposing our old models into the new world. And in my world of media, that's exactly what we do. In media, in advertising and media, we talk about reach and frequency. Right? How many people you reach, how often. That translates into unique users and page views. And that's a very media-centric worldview. That says, enough about you, how do you like my stuff? How often do you come to my stuff? And so then we try to go beyond that. We talk about attention metrics. Well, how often do you come to my stuff, and how long did you spend with it? Did you like my stuff? Did you share it? It's all media-centric. I think we have to shift around. So in my field, in journalism, I argue that we've got to shift journalism from being a content factory into being a service. And if journalism is a service, if it helps people accomplish their goals, then what we must do is listen for what the goals of the public are. And the key skill then starts not with making content, but instead with listening. And this, by the way, is why we're starting a new degree at my school at CUNY in what we call social journalism. It starts with the skills of listening to the public. And that's not just journalism, it's any field. It's manufacturing and design and consumer products. How do we move the people formerly known as the consumer up the chain to the idea of helping in design? These are fundamental changes in the business models of what we do, in the cultural models of what we do, and we've just barely begun. We don't know what it is yet. We're still transposing the old models into the new. John Naughton, who was a columnist on The Observer in London, wrote a column, which I love, a couple years ago, in which he asked us to imagine that we are a pollster on a bridge in the city of Mainz a few years after Gutenberg invented the press, 20 years after, which is about as far away as we are now from the invention of the web. The commercial browser came out 20 years ago next month in October 1994. So he said, ask good citizens of Mainz whether they think Gutenberg's invention will disrupt the Catholic Church, fuel the Reformation, spark the scientific revolution, change our notion of education and thus of childhood itself. And I would add, change our notion of nations. Nah, you'd say, you're overdoing it. But indeed, Gutenberg did all those things. And indeed, I think that Sir Tim Berners-Lee has the potential to be doing all those things over again. If we question the idea of the mass, if we were all turned into a mass by mass media, mass propaganda, mass manufacturing, mass marketing, mass media, well, we now have the chance to change that idea. If we as masses were made into nations, but instead now each of you and each of us can cross over languages because you people are so wonderful with your English, and through the amazing telegraph that we have today, we can all communicate with each other everywhere around the world. We can find each other in new communities, perhaps new definitions of nations. What does that do to our sense of the world? So I want to leave you with this thought, and then I want to come out and have a discussion with all of you, and I'll run around like a fool with a microphone and try not to trip on all the wires. But I think that we are only in the year 1472 in Gutenberg years. We don't know what the net is yet. We don't know what its potential is yet. It's not going to be invented by me because I'm too old or the technology is too new. It may not even be invented by the younger among you. It may be invented by your children and your grandchildren. For as strange as the newspaper was to the town crier, so will the technologies in the future of the internet be to those inventions that we have today. And ideas like mass media and newspapers and mass marketing and consumer products that are all the same for everyone versus, as we saw before, 3D printers can rethink what we do. Or even this, you know, I have my Android phone because I live La Vida Google. But we saw, what was it, 10 million iPhone 6s being sold over the weekend. They may look all the same, but of course, each one is different because of the software inside. These are fundamental changes in society. We don't know what it means yet. We don't know what the potential is yet. Yes, there can be some dangers, but I think we're smart people and we'll figure it out. The most important thing to do is to find the opportunities in this and keep those opportunities open. Eric Schmidt said that the internet could only be invented because young engineers didn't have to ask permission. So let's not set the rules that require permission for innovation. Let's enable innovation to grow at its own speed and its own will. We'll figure it out, we'll control it, we'll worry about it sufficiently. I'm not worried about the worriers in that sense. We'll have plenty of worry. What we need is more invention and innovation. And if anyone's going to do it, you are. So now let's have a conversation. Thank you. I'm going to turn So at this point, someone says, oh, questions, but let's have questions or arguments or anything like that. So I'll come down and run around, anyone at all, and don't embarrass me. There's that first person who's always embarrassed. No one wants to put up their hands. And Magnus is going to be very embarrassed if he invited me here and no one has anything to say. So someone argue with any point I have. Anyone? Yes, thank you very much. A good Twig fan is going to help me out here.
Well, I'm going to reiterate the question I asked you previously. Why do you think it's such a huge difference between the technopanic in Europe as opposed to the US?
Well, I'm a New Yorker and a teacher, so we have the license to answer questions with questions. So let me first turn the question around. Since you're European and I'm not, why do you think?
Thank you. I would assume that, no, I think my theory is the history of the US, the whole trying to get away from the European dominance and therefore kind of distrusting governments more than companies, perhaps.
I think it's a good point. When I wrote my last book called Public Parts, I presented it at Republika in Berlin, and I talked about what I called das Deutsche Paradoxon, the German paradox, which is that the Germans are private about everything except when you go into the sauna, and they're private about everything except their private parts. And someone said, well, what about the American paradox, Jarvis? And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, that you've had the best governments of anyone in the world these last 200 years, but you distrust government. And I said, it's a really good point, and perhaps that's why we have good government, is because we do distrust them. I don't know what the answer is for Europe, but I don't think that we should presume that certain large, old institutions speak for the citizens of Europe. Because you look, again, to pick on Germany, major publishers have gotten government to make major changes, yet Germany is where Google has the second highest penetration in the world. Penetration of Google in the US is about 63%, in Germany it's about 98%. So the citizens of Germany seem to be fine with Google and use it like crazy. It's government, and I mean, both ends are broad generalizations, but I don't think we should assume that Europe is it's being portrayed by its large institutions. Anyone else? Oh, come on. Magnus.
You wrote the book, What Would Google Do, a few years back. What is the next step for Google, do you think? Where is it going?
I don't know. If I did, I'd be wealthy. Eric Schmidt just came out. Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg just published a book yesterday on how Google does what it does. My fear is it's going to prove everything I said in what Google do wrong. I only read Larry Page's introduction last night, and it's very good. It gives you a window on the company. I think that Google is not a search company at all. Though search is a miracle, Microsoft is fighting the last battle with Google, which is search. I think instead that Google does hold true to its mission of organizing the world's information and making it accessible to people in the world. One. Two, I think that Google in its business model is essentially a company about signal generation. What I mean by that is that, once again, because I use the magnificent application Waze. Anyone here use Waze, traffic application? Your traffic isn't as bad in Sweden as it is in New Jersey, I tell you that. I depend upon it greatly. Google knows where I live and where I work as a result. It has those signals about me. It also knows what kind of pizza I like. It knows where I'm going. If I went to Google now, right now, it would probably tell me how long it would take me to get to the restaurant I went to last night, which was very good. I love herring. It's telling me, yes, indeed, it's telling me 5 minutes to the restaurant Sjöbaren.
Sjöbaren.
Jesus. You people. It was very good, by the way. I do recommend it. But, by the way, I said I was going to be here on Twitter, and somebody said, you need some restaurant recommendations? I said, yes, and he sent back, and that's where I went last night because of Twitter. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that phenomenal what can happen? Anyway, so Google, I think secondarily, is a signal generation company, and they'll hold true to that. That's why they're in the phone business. Third, I think that Google is, at the end of the day, a service company. I now live entirely in the cloud. I use my Nexus 5 and my Nexus 7 because I use Docs. My only computer now is a Google Chromebook. I don't have anything against Apple. Apple's wonderful, but I haven't used an Apple or a Microsoft product in a year. Google provides incredibly valuable services to me through which it gets more signals, through which it can sell better advertising, through which it can make more money. So I think that's where it goes. Finally, I think Google does continue with its moonshots. It's weird stuff that we can't anticipate. And that's what Larry Page said in the introduction to Eric Schmidt's and Jonathan Rosenberg's book, is he said it's hard to get employees to think big enough, to be daring enough, to be crazy enough. And that's what they try to encourage. And I think that Google is the new pure research institution. It's the new Bell Labs. It's going to invent whatever the next transistor is or whatever that is. So it might seem absolutely insane to invent the self-driving car, but I think it will have some opportunities for life. Anyone else? Somewhere in the back. I'm going to walk back and embarrass you. Somebody. I'm also going to scare the poor cameraman to death. Sorry about that. Back here. What's your fear for the internet? Anybody? Good. I need my exercise, too, to make my Google Watch think I'm walking a lot.
Thanks. A comment, I think, what you describe as the techno-panic, that the technology is today doing things that we perceive as not in sync with our values, like the publication of our private information and such. And you talk about it as from now on and forwards, it will always be this way. But I would argue that it's not from now on and forwards, that it's from now on and like 10 more years until these bugs are fixed by innovations in cryptography, decentralized systems, so that the anthropologists from 1,000 years in the future, when they look at us, they will know very well the intricacies of private life of people who live today, but not so much the intricacies of people who live in 2030 or something.
I think you're right about that, and I think that's an important thing for the technologists to do, is to invent the technologies that make us more secure and safer. At the same time, though, I think that we are by nature becoming more public because we see the benefits in sharing. We couldn't share before because we didn't own a printing press. Well, now, of course, we all own a printing press, and we see benefits to that, benefits to openness. Now, that doesn't mean we want to all be open. Two examples. One is, I think that gays and lesbians in the world used publicness as their best weapon. The bigots who had forced them into the closet, who defined shame, they shouldn't have been forced out, but those who walked out of the closet and said, here we are, you got a problem with this, used that publicness as their weapon against the bigots. One other example, I think we saw in the last few months with the public reaction to photos and videos in two ridiculous stories, well, not one very tragic story, but a ridiculous contrast. The beheadings by ISIS. People said, it's wrong to share those, don't share those, it's wrong to look at them. The celebrity nude photos. People said, it's wrong to share those, don't look at those were theft and that's bad. What did we see happening there? We saw the beginnings, I think, of norms being created around this technology that said, whatever the technology allows, we as human beings in a civil society think that's wrong. Now, then the technology can catch up with that and can make it easier to deal with that. But I think we're starting to see the good in technology in society coming out. Now, one thing we'll never get rid of is trolls and assholes, right? And I think that there's an issue with trolls online that's very troubling. And there was a recent study that said that trolls, true trolls, are actually very sick people who are sadists. No technology is going to solve that. But what we can do as a society is not give them attention, not give them what they want. And so there are solutions that are going to be both technology-based and societally based, I think. Are you a technologist?
Yeah, I guess I'm more on the technologist side.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm commenting, that we're very often discussing the internet from the perspective of media. And I mean, you're a professor of journalism. You're sort of like, in the metaphor with the horse buggies, you're the horse buggy driver
True.
instructor. One of the modern ones that adopted to the new technology, but still as a society we're seeing this as driverless carriage in many ways, like social media. I mean, it's and I agree that it's probably going to come out something very different. But I think the tools and the thing with the hacked nude pictures, of course, information wants to be free, but in this case, it wasn't intended to be free,
right.
And that's the problem. And the tools need to get better. And today's celebrities are paying the price for the tools being bad.
Yes.
So that their perfectly human right of taking nudie pics leads to a huge mass violation of their privacy.
I agree. But I think our solutions are going to be both technology-based and human-based. Anyone else? Back here. No, I saw a hand go up. Anyone else at all? Oh, I didn't think you'd be so shy as a crowd. Surely you have something to disagree with. Oh, wait, there's one here. Yes, sir.
What do you think about these private companies getting all this power with no, virtually no transparency, opposed to like democracies where you have some transparency and you can vote, you know?
Let me ask you a question. Do you trust Google?
No.
Why not?
I don't know them. They're a private company who wants to make money.
Is there a company you do trust?
Not as such.
Aha! That says it all. That's a European attitude. Eric Schmidt argues that Google is as transparent as it can be. And we can debate that for a long time. But it starts its products in public. It develops them in public, and it even has mistakes in public. Right? So when it started Wave, as opposed to Waze, it was a disaster, and they killed it. I don't think I could see General Motors doing that, right? So I would argue that Google in many ways is more transparent than other companies. I think back to the answer about why Europe and where we see Europe here, part of the problem is that, and Schmidt has said this too, the internet is this huge, transformative, disruptive force. People are going to be afraid of it and worried about it and distrustful of it. And what's the most visible entity on the internet? Google. So Google embodies both some of the best hopes and some of the greatest fears. Now, the justice minister in Germany, picking on Germany once more, just said that Google should reveal its algorithms. Well, that's absurd, because if it did, then everyone could game the algorithms and there'd be no value in search whatsoever. And indeed, is the justice minister telling Coke to reveal its formula or Colonel Sanders to reveal his secret spices? No. Google can't reveal that. Does Google pay too little in taxes? Perhaps yes. But it's not up to Google to decide how much tax to pay. It's up to legislators to decide how much tax to pay. It's the job of governments together, working as lawmakers and as diplomats, to agree on closing loopholes for taxes. Google's responsibility to its shareholders, and full disclosure, I am one, a few shares, is to reduce its costs as much as possible. But it puts it in a position where people say, well, Google's greedy because they're acting like a company. They're acting like a big American company. That's true. So I'm not sure what kind of regulation we want to add to what already exists. We have lots of laws. Some of those laws, like as on taxes, are badly done by the lawmakers, not by the companies themselves. So when it comes down to the end of the day, given the story of the NSA, given the story of what the UK has done, given the story of what German authorities have done, given the stories of Iran and China and Turkey, would I trust my information more to a company or to a government? I'd say a company. Because I think that the marketplace, mind you, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Hillary Clinton voting Democrat. I'm not a libertarian. But the marketplace does provide checks on the power of companies, I think. You could argue.
Yeah, perhaps.
Okay. Oh, good, perfect, great.
We have a comment from Lucas Lindell, who says, shouldn't people, since they are to be treated as individuals and not a mass, have the right to be forgotten?
The right to be forgotten sounds wonderful, but a few things to keep in mind. If I tell Marcus something in the car riding yesterday somewhere, Magnus, thank you, sorry, Magnus. Yes, he's been forgotten, yes. No, I just turned 60, that's the answer. I don't need a memory anymore, I have Google. If I tell Magnus something, then what I have said to him is public to that extent. And the responsibility for what happens to that information now rests on Magnus's shoulders. If I told you, any of you individually, that I had prostate cancer, and I thus tell you about my malfunctioning penis, you'd wonder, what the hell am I doing that for? Isn't that insane? But out of that, I've gotten great benefit. I've blogged about that. People have given me advice and support and information, and I've encouraged other men to get their PSA checked. And if you're my age and haven't had it checked, go get it checked. So I think that there is an opportunity in publicness that we have to deal with first. But then secondly, we have to recognize that when you tell anyone anything, you have lost control of it, period. You learned that in 3rd grade on the school playground when you told someone something in a secret and it was all around the lunch table by the time you got there. We all know that. And so can you then say that there is a right to erase that from others' brains? You all saw the movie Men in Black. There's no little pen that makes you erase what you've just seen. I don't think there is a right to be forgotten. I really don't. Because I think that is a right then to control someone else's knowledge of you. Is it wise in some cases to erase things from Google? Well, Google's not the issue. The material exists somewhere on the internet. It can spread anywhere on the internet. Those companies that try to help you with your reputation would have you do more that pushes that history farther down in history. So it's unpopular to say, but no, I don't think there's such a right.
Next comment is from Fredrik Brander at Dynamite Harry. Could techno fatigue be a side of today's techno panic?
Fatigue, yes, I think so. And I think that Google Glass is an example of that. Right, I had great hope, oh, this is the coolest thing. I fought to get an invitation to get Google Glass. I was like an idiot, spent $1,500 to get it. It didn't work very well because I had to put it over these glasses. So then I spent another $500 to get the lenses for it, and I still sat there and said, it's kind of a pain, it's kind of ridiculous, it looks dorky, I don't really know what to do with it. So yeah, there are moments when I get carried away with it and don't know. But you know what, in the end of the day, I'm still geeky enough, I still love this technology enough that even when I have a change like that, I still also ran to get my Moto 360 watch. So technology fatigue, I think, fades as well. Anything else?
Just questions that you've sort of already answered along the way. Okay. But basically also there was discussion about death threats posted online, celeb leaks, and bullying, those sorts of things, if we should be afraid of that.
Yeah, bullying and trolls are a big issue, I think, and I don't know what to do about that. Here's one way to look at this. It's a question. Do open networks necessarily foster incivility? Look at Twitter. Twitter has prided itself on being open. Facebook doesn't publish everything you say to all of your friends. It has an algorithm that gets in the middle. Google Plus does the same thing. Twitter has been open, right? Twitter says everybody's going to hear everything, which sounds good. And in fact, it is good. That's what allows revolutionaries in Tahrir Square to speak to each other without censors. It's very important. In the case in the U.S. in Ferguson, Missouri, of a police shooting a young black man, Twitter allowed that story to rise up in America even while media were not paying attention to it. So Twitter's openness is very important, but Twitter also allows trolls to take over, including ISIS itself. All right? ISIS uses Twitter. And Twitter then started cutting off accounts that posted ISIS videos and nude celebrity photos. So then Twitter was no longer open. And that means, back to your question, wherever you were, that means that now a company is in charge of what we see and hear. The company is the gatekeeper. Do we want that or not? And I'm not sure what my answer is, because on the one hand, I celebrate openness immensely. On the other hand, companies do have a responsibility to civility and to their own brands and to their users. How many here think that it's right for Twitter to cut off accounts that put up ISIS beheading videos? How many here thinks that that's wrong? The first win. I tend to agree, but then I have to ask, where's the open network where anything can happen? And the internet needs to be that. So these are not easy questions at all. These are very difficult questions.
Should we, is there any other questions?
Good.
I have to put this, the question according to this, the publisher. I think Twitter should not put out these accounts, but as a publisher, I think I have the responsibility for what I publish. And where are the publishers in the future of internet? What do you think?
Funny you should ask. I have a book coming out November 6th. A very geeky book. It's very called Geeks Bearing Gifts, in which I argue that we have to look at new relationships, forms, and models. I think there will be publishers. I think there will be journalists. I think there will be people who add value to the flow. But the key difference to me is we are no longer gatekeepers. We are no longer controllers. You no longer have to come to us to get information. Now the internet enables people to share information on their own without us. What we have to do as journalists and publishers is add value to that. There's a guy named Andy Carvin who tweeted the Arab Spring from his home in Washington, D.C., and he added journalistic value to all the tweets that occurred. He confirmed facts, debunked rumors, added context, got people to help him confirm things. But the flow was going on without him. So I think that's how we have to look at our role, is to say that we can find as many ways as possible to encourage people to share what they want to share on their own and take advantage of that, but then say, what's missing? What are the questions that aren't being asked and answered? That's the job of the journalist.
Welcome up, Jordan, to the stage. Or was it Jeff? One final question before we'll let you off the stage here. You haven't mentioned the Chinese market and Alibaba being one of the major going to the stock market in the US recently. What do you think about that kind of companies coming from another culture compared to the US?
I'm not sure yet, and I have never been to China, so I speak only in ignorance, which matters, and I think that's part of the point. Is there's still a large cultural divide between Asia and other parts of the world, and so it's been very hard for American and European companies to go into China. I think it's going to be equally difficult for Chinese companies to come into the rest of the world because there remains that divide. We see the same with Korea to some extent as well. Incredible development in parts of gaming and such in Korea, and though Samsung and LG have done magnificently, not so true of services and such. So I think that there's going to be some difficulty there yet for those to come in. Now, of course, China is a big enough market in its own to justify anything. That's what the Alibaba story shows. Will Alibaba take over the world? I wouldn't count against it, but I also wouldn't bet on it yet.
If you were to look for the next really big thing happening outside of the US, would you go to Brazil or to China?
Great question. I actually think Brazil is quite unsung in internet. Brazil has been early on trends in social and sharing photos and such more than anywhere else, and I don't see many companies going there, so I think that's the secret place to go to see innovations.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Jeff, for coming and speaking to us, and we'll give you maybe a t-shirt and a map over the internet, and let's give him a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.